Sultan Abdul Hamid II was the last of the great sultans. He came on the stage of history at a time when the empire was bankrupt and could not defend itself against its many enemies. In the face of aggression from without and sabotage from within, hammered by forces of nationalism and weakened by internal sabotage from some of the millets, he waged a valiant battle to preserve what was left of the once mighty empire. In this effort, he was partially successful, preserving its Islamic core for 40 years and keeping the empire out of a major war for as long. But his methods and the internal tensions built up by the very modernization processes he had fostered, finally did him in. Abdul Hamid inherited an empire that was in dire financial straits. Beginning with the Crimean War, 1853 to 1856, the Ottoman debt mounted steadily. The burden of keeping a large standing army and modernizing it in the face of perpetual foreign threats required continued borrowing, so that by 1878 the public debt stood at more than 13.5 billion kurush. The cost of servicing this enormous debt was more than 1.4 billion kurush, a sum equal to 70% of all revenues. The heavy debt burden cast a long shadow on all aspects of the Sultan's reign, including international relations, education, agriculture and political reform. A militarily and economically weak Ottoman Empire was the object of European imperial ambitions. Russia had emerged as a major Eurasian power, having swallowed up the Turkoman territories of Central Asia. In this pursuit, he substituted diplomacy for war, playing off the ambitions of one European power against another, compromising where he could and buying time to reform the institutions that held the empire together. To a large extent, he succeeded. But he had arrived on the stage of history too late. His autocratic style won him the displeasure of his people. And the very success of his reforms set in motion powerful forces that ultimately toppled him from power and led the empire to its demise. Abdul Hamid II, 1842 to 1918, was the son of Sultan Abdul Majid, 1823 to 1861, and a Circassian mother. As a child, he received an education worthy of a caliph and sultan. His tutors included some of the leading ulama and sheikhs of Istanbul. He was well versed in the Quran, the Sunnah of the Prophet, and in the Hanafi school of fiqh. He was trained in Sufi practices as well, particularly the Naqshbandi and Helveti orders, which had a significant following in the empire. As a prince, he sought out bankers, diplomats and leaders of the Tanzimat reforms, discussing with them issues that affected the empire, and in the process, he acquired a broad understanding of economics, administration and international politics. As a young man, he was retiring in nature, avoiding the frivolities that so often consumed other princes. He was fastidious in prayer, reclusive by nature, pious in his religious observances and charitable in disposition. These qualities were to serve him well later, endearing him to the Muslim masses worldwide and enabling him, for the first time in the 19th century, to provide a semblance of political focus for the global Islamic community. Immediately after his accession, Sultan Abdul Hamid came up against the Russian ambitions in the Balkans. The Tsar, declaring himself the champion of all Slavs and the protector of the Eastern Orthodox Church, encouraged an insurrection in Serbia. The Ottomans successfully put down the uprising in 1876. Realizing that active intervention on behalf of the Serbs carried a risk of war with Austria-Hungary, the Tsar shifted his focus to Bulgaria. The excuse for intervention was the supposed mistreatment of Christian Bulgars by the Ottomans, while the objective was the creation of a Greater Bulgaria, under Russian domination, extending south from the Danube all the way to the Aegean Sea. The western shores of the Black Sea would then be under Russian domination and the armed forces of the Tsar would have access to the Mediterranean. However, this plan too required the cooperation of the Austrians. During the Crimean War of 1853 to 1856, Austrian troops had occupied Romania with the connivance of the Russians. For Russian troops to reach Bulgaria, they would have to cross Romania, now under Habsburg domination. Fearing that overlapping Russian and Austrian ambitions might lead to war, Bismarck of Germany proposed a division of the Ottoman Empire, with Bosnia-Herzegovina and Serbia going to the Habsburgs while Romania and enlarged Bulgaria would come under Russian domination. The British, fearing that a further expansion of Austrian and Russian influence towards the Mediterranean would threaten their own interests, opposed this plan and proposed instead a conference in Istanbul to reconcile the competing ambitions of the powers. Bulgaria, while nominally staying within the Ottoman Empire, was to be partitioned into two provinces. At the Istanbul Conference, held in November 1876, Britain proposed a series of reforms which, while mollifying Russia and Austria-Hungary, would keep them out of the Mediterranean. The governor of each province would be a Christian, appointed with the concurrence of the European powers. Except for tobacco and customs duty, all revenues would go to the provincial government. The judicial system would be overhauled and new judges appointed with the approval of the powers. Separate police forces would be created for Christian and Muslim villages. Ottoman troops would be withdrawn from the province and their place taken up by Belgian troops. Britain proposed similar reforms for Bosnia-Herzegovina, where Austria-Hungary would provide oversight for their implementation. These proposals, if implemented, would have meant virtual independence for both Bulgaria and Bosnia-Herzegovina and would have legalized the intervention of the powers into the affairs of these two important Ottoman provinces. The Bulgarian issue had emerged as an important one due to a Russian-engineered insurrection in that province. The Bulgars captured a large number of towns and slaughtered thousands of Turks. Unable to control the uprising, the Ottoman governor of the province, Nadim Pasha, organized local militias to protect Muslim villages. Massacres and counter-massacres followed. The Europeans, always quick to point fingers when Christians were killed, while closing their eyes to massacres of Muslims, played up the Christian casualties. In the British Parliament, Gladstone, in a rousing speech, referred to the Ottomans as the unspeakable Turks and demanded a concerted European action to curb the Ottomans. The Tsar threatened military action unless sweeping reforms were implemented in the province under Russian supervision. To preempt the European powers, the Ottoman court, the Vizierate, pushed for the promulgation of a constitution that would remove any pretext for foreign intervention. At the request of Mithat Pasha, chairman of the Council of State, Sultan Abdulhamid authorized the formation of a constitution commission. Working round the clock, the commission produced a constitution, which embodied far-reaching reforms and touched on every aspect of Ottoman administration.